Good evening, and welcome to Midnight Whispers Stories. Tonight, we're venturing far beyond the last traces of civilization, into the frozen silence of Alaska. A place where the cold isn't just weather, it's alive. Where voices echo across the tundra with no one to speak them, and shadows move against the snow even when there's no light at all. These are not legends told to scare children, but chilling accounts from oil workers, bush pilots, rangers, and isolated towns. People who've seen things in the endless white that defy every law of nature. From the abandoned mining camps buried in ice, to the ghost towns swallowed by permafrost, each story reveals something ancient stirring beneath Alaska's frozen crust. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe to Midnight Whispers Stories for true horror tales from the world's most remote places. Click the bell, so you don't miss it when the dark comes early and never leaves. Now, let's step into the endless night of Alaska, where the cold remembers every scream, and the silence listens back. Story 1. Sound beneath the ice, the glaciers are crying. That is what the locals told me when I first arrived in Juneau, and I laughed because I thought they were being poetic. Metaphorical about climate change or something. I was wrong about everything. My name is David Chen. I am a sound engineer from Seattle, and until 3 months ago, I had a good life. A career, a future. Now I have insomnia and a prescription for pills I'm too afraid to take because when I sleep, I drown. I came to Alaska in early September on a contract job. A documentary crew needed someone to capture ambient audio for a film about glacial recession in the Juneau ice field. Easy money. 2 weeks in the wilderness recording ice, wind, and whatever else made noise. I'd done similar work in Patagonia and Iceland. This should have been routine. The helicopter dropped me and a guide named Tom at a research camp near the Taku Glacier on day 3. Tom was mid-50s, weathered in that way people get when they spend more time outdoors than in. He didn't talk much during the flight, just stared out the window at the endless white below us. When we landed and the helicopter lifted away, leaving us in that profound silence that only exists in truly remote places, he finally spoke. The glaciers had been making sounds they shouldn't make. I adjusted my recording equipment and asked what he meant. Ice makes all kinds of sounds. Cracking, groaning, calving, events that sound like thunder. It's normal. He shook his head and pointed toward the massive wall of blue-white ice that rose maybe 300 feet in front of us. Not those sounds. This is different. You'll hear it tonight. The camp was basic. 2 tents, a cooking area, radio equipment that barely worked because of the mountains. Tom explained that we were about 12 miles from the nearest research station and that the weather could turn violent with almost no warning. He showed me the emergency beacon and made me promise I'd deactivate it if anything happened to him. Standard safety protocol for remote work. Nothing unusual, except for the way he kept looking at the glacier, like it was watching us back. We spent the afternoon setting up my equipment. I placed microphones at various distances from the ice face, running cables back to my recording station in one of the tents. The work was meditative, the kind of focus that makes you forget about everything else. But as the sun started to drop behind the mountains and the temperature plummeted, I noticed something that made my fingers slow on the cables. The ice was wet, not melting exactly, more like it was weeping. Long streaks of water ran down the face of the glacier, forming patterns that looked almost deliberate. Almost like tears running down a face. Tom saw me staring and told me it had started about 6 weeks ago. Multiple glaciers across the ice field, water seeping from deep inside the ice in patterns that defied explanation. The scientists couldn't figure it out. The water was coming from pockets that shouldn't exist, at temperatures that shouldn't produce that kind of flow. And then there was the sound. We ate dinner in silence as darkness settled over the ice. The temperature had dropped to maybe 15 degrees, and my breath came out in clouds that hung in the still air. Everything was quiet, perfectly, unnaturally quiet. No wind, no animal sounds, just the occasional crack of ice adjusting to the cold. And then, sometime around midnight, I heard it. At first I thought it was wind moving through crevasses. A low, mournful sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. But as I lay in my sleeping bag, my eyes adjusting to the darkness inside the tent, I realized it wasn't wind. The sound had variation, cadence. It rose and fell like something breathing, like something crying. I grabbed my headphones and checked my recording equipment. All the microphones were picking it up. The waveforms on my laptop screen showed clear audio, but the patterns were wrong. They had too much variation to be geological, too much emotional range. I recorded thousands of hours of natural sounds in my career, and I They'd never seen anything like this. The sound continued for hours. Sometimes it would fade almost to nothing, and you'd think it was over. Then it would surge back, louder and more desperate. And underneath it, so faint I almost missed it, was something else. Something that might have been words. Voices calling from deep beneath the ice. I didn't sleep. Neither did Tom. When dawn finally came and the sound faded with the rising sun, we sat across from each other at the camp stove, not saying anything. His face was gray. His hands shook as he poured coffee. After maybe 20 minutes, he told me about the seismologists, how they'd come up 3 weeks ago with sensitive equipment, trying to find the source, trying to measure ice movement or tectonic activity that could explain the sound. They found nothing. No seismic events. No unusual ice dynamics. The glaciers were stable, but the sound continued every night, growing louder and more complex. And the scientists started having dreams. I asked what kind of dreams. Tom looked at me with eyes that had seen something he couldn't see. Dreams of drowning, of being trapped under ice in freezing water, sinking deeper and deeper while voices called from below. All three scientists had the same dream. When they woke, they found water in their sleeping bags. Salt water, which was impossible because we were 12 miles from the ocean and 3,000 feet above sea level. The scientists left the next day and never came back. The research station shut down their ice field operations, but the documentary crew still wanted their audio. So here we were. Two idiots camping next to something that shouldn't exist. I told Tom I was a professional, that I did get the recordings and we leave, that there had to be a rational explanation. He just nodded and went back to his tent. I spent the day recording every sound I could find. Ice movement, wind picking up in the afternoon, the drip and trickle of that strange water weeping from the glacier. When I played it back through my headphones, everything sounded normal. Clean audio, good material, but there was something underneath it all. A frequency that my equipment was barely picking up. Something subsonic that I could feel more than hear. A vibration that made my teeth ache and my chest feel tight. The second night was worse. The crying started earlier, right around sunset. And this time I could hear the words. They weren't in English. Maybe they weren't in any language. But my brain kept trying to interpret them, to make sense of sounds that felt almost familiar. Almost like something I should understand. I made the mistake of leaving my tent. I told myself I was checking the microphones, making sure the cables hadn't defrozen. But really, I needed to see the glacier. Needed to understand where the sound was coming from. The moon was nearly full, and the ice glowed blue-white in the darkness. The weeping had intensified. Water streamed down the face in dozens of places, and in the moonlight it looked like the glacier was bleeding silver. The sound was overwhelming out there, surrounding me. I could feel it in my bones, in my skull. And then I saw something that made me forget how to breathe. There were shapes in the ice. Not just cracks or formations. Shapes that looked like people. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Frozen mid-motion, their arms reaching upward, their mouths open. They were deep inside the glacier, but clear enough to see in the moonlight. And the water was coming from them, from their eyes and mouths, like they were crying even in death. I ran back to the tent and grabbed my camera. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold it, but I managed to take maybe 20 photos before the battery died. Just died, fully charged that morning, and now completely dead. I tried my backup. Same thing. My phone, dead. All my electronics except the recording equipment just stopped working. Tom appeared at my tent entrance. His face was pale, and he was breathing hard. We need to leave, now. He'd seen them too. The people in the ice. And he realized what they were. What we were hearing. The Juneau ice field has been here for thousands of years. Maybe longer. And people have been crossing it for just as long. Indigenous groups, Russian explorers, gold rush prospectors, modern climbers and researchers, and some of them never made it out. They fell into crevasses, got caught in storms, disappeared into the ice and were never found. Tom, his grandfather had told him stories about the lost ones. How the ice preserves everything. How sometimes the glaciers give back what they'd taken, but not always the same as when it went in. The people in the ice were drowning. Not in water, in time, trapped in a state between frozen death and some kind of horrible awareness. And as the climate warmed and the glaciers wept, they were waking up, crying out, pulling at anyone who came close enough to hear. I wanted to argue, to say it was impossible, but I'd seen them. I heard them. And deep down, in a place beyond logic, I knew he was right. We tried to radio for extraction. The radio was dead. Tom went for the emergency beacon. It activated, but we had no way of knowing if the signal got through. All we could do was pack up and wait for dawn, and try not to listen to the sound of hundreds of drowning voices calling from the ice. That third night, I dreamed. I was underwater, cold water so intense it felt like knives in my lungs. I was sinking into darkness, and I could see shapes below me. People reaching up, their fingers almost touching mine. I tried to swim up, but something was pulling me down. Not hands, the water itself, like it had weight and intention, like it wanted me to join the others, to sink down into the ice and sleep forever, crying frozen tears that would seep out centuries later when someone else came to listen. I woke up gasping. My sleeping bag was soaked. I unzipped it with numb fingers and saw that the water wasn't too fresh. It was cloudy with sediment, glacial water, and it tasted like salt when it touched my lips. Tom was standing outside his tent, staring at the glacier. He didn't turn when I joined him. Didn't acknowledge me at all. He just pointed at the ice face. The shapes were closer now, pressed against the surface like they were trying to push through. And the weeping had become a flood. Water poured from the glacier in sheets, and in the pre-dawn light I could see that it was full of things. Fragments of cloth, pieces of wood, small objects that might have been tools or jewelry. The glacier was releasing everything it had swallowed over the centuries. Everything except the people. They stayed trapped in the ice, crying and reaching and drowning in frozen time. The helicopter came at noon. The pilot took one look at our faces and didn't ask questions. We left everything except our personal gear, all my recording equipment, all the footage. I didn't care. I just needed to get away from that sound, from those shapes in the ice, from the dreams of drowning. But distance doesn't matter. I learned that in the weeks after we got back, the dreams followed me to Seattle. Every night I sink into cold water and feel the pull of all those frozen dead trying to bring me down with them. I wake up with wet sheets. Sometimes there's sediment in my bed. Sometimes it smells like salt. I went to doctors, therapists, sleep specialists. They gave me pills and theories and sympathetic looks. None of them understood. How could they? They'd never heard glaciers cry, never seen the faces pressed against ancient ice, never felt the pull of something that has been drowning for centuries and wants company in the dark. Tom killed himself 6 weeks after we got back. Drove his truck off a cliff near Juneau. They found him in the water. When they pulled him out, his lungs were full of ice. Fresh glacial ice that shouldn't have been there. The coroner called it impossible, put down drowning and left it at that. But I knew he couldn't take the dreams anymore. Couldn't stand waking up night after night feeling like he was suffocating under miles of frozen water. I should be scared I'm next. But mostly I'm tired. So tired, because the sound never really stops. Even here in Seattle, even with traffic and sirens and all the noise of the city, I can hear it underneath everything. That low, mournful crying, those voices calling from deep in the ice. And every night the water in my dreams gets a little deeper. The pull gets a little stronger. The faces get a little closer. The documentary never got made. The production company scrapped it after what happened to Tom. But sometimes I wonder if anyone else has gone up there. If anyone else has heard the glaciers weeping and made the mistake of listening too closely. If somewhere right now, someone is lying in a tent on the Juneau ice field, recording sounds they don't understand, while shapes in the ice press closer to the surface and the drowning dead call out for company. If you ever go to Alaska, stay away from the glaciers. Especially if you hear them crying, because that sound will follow you. It'll get into your head and your dreams and your bones. And one night you'll wake up underwater, sinking deeper and deeper, and you'll realize that the ice has been waiting for you all along. That some things that freeze never truly die. They just wait, and cry, and pull. Story 2. Summer the salmon watched us. The fish had my brother, his eyes. I'm not talking about a resemblance. I am talking about the exact shade of hazel with that ring of gold around the pupil that only existed in our family. The same eyes I'd seen close for the last time 3 months earlier when we buried him at sea off the coast of Bristol Bay. My name is Frank Kowalski. I'm 62 years old, and for 40 years I've kept silent about what happened during the summer of 1984. About what we pulled from the water. About why half the commercial fishing fleet in Bristol Bay quit mid-season and never came back. About why I haven't touched seafood since Reagan was president. This is the truth. Every word. And I am telling it now because I am dying. Stage 4 lung cancer. 6 months, maybe less. And I can take this secret to my grave. Someone needs to know what is in those waters. What might come back? Bristol Bay, Alaska, June 1984. The richest sockeye salmon fishery in the world. Every summer, millions of fish return from the Pacific Ocean to spawn in the rivers and streams where they were born. It's been happening for thousands of years. The UK people built their lives around it. Russian traders came for it. American companies made fortunes from it. By the 80s, the commercial fishing season in Bristol Bay was a month-long gold rush. Boats from all over the West Coast descended on the bay, dropped their nets, and pulled up money by the ton. My brother Eddie and I ran a 36-foot gill netter called the North Star. We've been fishing together since '72. 12 seasons of hard work, good catches, and enough profit to support our families through the winter. Eddie had 2 daughters. I had a son. The salmon paid for their school clothes, their Christmas presents, their futures. Eddie died in March of '84. Heart attack on the boat during a winter cod trip. He was only 39. The doctor said it was genetic. Said our father had the same weak valve. Said I should get checked. I never did. Somehow it felt like acknowledging the weakness would make it real. Make me next. We buried Eddie at sea. That was his wish. He always said the ocean was his real home. That he felt more himself on the water than he ever did on land. So we took him out past the barrier islands, said our goodbyes, and let the bay take him. Watched his ashes scatter on the surface and then disappear into the green depths where the salmon swim. I should have sold the boat. Should have walked away, but fishing was all I knew. All Eddie and I had ever done together. And I couldn't to let go. Couldn't to accept that our partnership was over. So I hired a crew. 2 experienced deckhands named Miguel and Tommy. Good men, hard workers. Neither of them are alive today. The season opened on June 19th. Perfect weather, calm seas. Fish and Game predicted a strong run based on the test fishing numbers. Every boat in the fleet was optimistic. This was going to be a good year. A profitable year. None of us had any idea what was actually coming. The first net I pulled came up heavy. Really heavy. I thought maybe I snagged a log or fouled on some rocks. But when we hauled it to the surface, it was full of salmon. More than I've ever seen in a single net. Hundreds of them. Their silver bodies packed so tight in the mesh they could barely move. Tommy started picking them out, tossing fish into the hold, working fast the way you have to during the brief fishing periods when every minute counts. Then he stopped, just froze with a salmon in his hands. He was staring at it. I asked him what was wrong. He didn't answer. Miguel moved closer, looked at the fish, and backed away so fast he nearly fell over the side. I grabbed the salmon from Tommy's hands to see what had spooked them. The fish was looking at me, not the blank stare of a dead animal. This was focused, aware. Its eye tracked my movement as I turned it. The pupil contracted and dilated. And the color, Jesus Christ, the color was wrong. Instead of the flat black or silver of a normal salmon eye, this one was hazel. Human hazel, with a ring of gold around the pupil. Eddie's eyes. I threw the fish back in the water, told myself I was seeing things. That grief was making me imagine connections that didn't exist. That plenty of people had hazel eyes. It didn't mean anything. But when Miguel picked up another salmon, it had blue eyes. Clear blue, human blue. And when Tommy reluctantly grabbed another, brown. Deep brown with flecks of green. We checked every fish in that net. Every single one had human eyes. Different colors, different shapes. But all unmistakably human. All watching us with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. We dumped the entire catch. Threw it all back despite the lost income. Despite knowing we'd look like fools if anyone found out. I got on the radio to report equipment problems and headed back to port. But we didn't report what we'd seen. We didn't tell anyone. Because what would we say? That the salmon had human eyes? That they looked at us like they recognized us? We'd be laughed off the bay. Probably lose our fishing permits for wasting enforcement time with crazy stories. So we kept quiet, tied up at the dock, sat in the cabin and drank coffee and tried to convince ourselves we'd been mistaken. That the light had been weird. That we'd all been tired. The radio chatter that night told a different story. Other boats were reporting strange catches. Fish behaving abnormally. One skipper mentioned his crew refusing to handle the salmon. Another said his hold was full, but something felt wrong about the catch. Nobody said the word odd. Nobody admitted what they were seeing. But the fear was there, underneath the professional talk and the fishing jargon. The fear was spreading through the fleet like a virus. We went back out the next day. Had to. We couldn't afford to lose the season. Couldn't. let superstition cost us the income our families needed. Miguel had quit overnight, just left a note saying he was flying back to Seattle. So it was just Tommy and me pulling nets and trying to act normal. Trying to fish the way we fished for years. Like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Every salmon we caught had those eyes. Human eyes in every color imaginable. And they weren't just looking anymore. They were reacting. When we reach for them, they twist away. When we grab them, they go rigid. Not the normal death throes of a fish out of water. This was different, deliberate. Like they were playing dead. Like they were waiting for something. And the sounds. God, the sounds. Normal salmon are silent. They might splash and thrash, but they don't vocalize. These did. Clicking sounds from deep in their throats. Rhythmic patterns that changed and evolved. Tommy said it sounded like echolocation. Like dolphin communication. I said it sounded like language. Like they were talking to each other. Neither of us was wrong. We filled the hold anyway. Took our catch to the tender ship where the processors bought fish directly from the boats. The tender crew didn't notice anything wrong. Or maybe they did and didn't care. They weighed our catch, paid us, and moved on to the next boat. And I watched those salmon, with their human eyes and their clicking language, get sorted and packed and prepared for shipment to restaurants and stores across America. Watched knowing that something was wrong with them, that people were going to eat them, that I was complicit in whatever happened next. Nothing happened. No reports of illness. No contamination warnings. The salmon looked normal once they were processed. Just another commercial catch. Just food. And I started to wonder if the eyes were the only thing wrong. If maybe the fish were safe to eat despite their appearance. If maybe this was just some weird mutation that didn't affect the meat. I wanted to believe that. Needed to believe it, because the alternative was too horrible to consider. By late June, half the fleet had quit. Just pulled their nets and headed south. Some skippers said it was mechanical problems. Others claimed family emergencies. But everyone knew the real reason. The salmon weren't right. Something fundamental had changed. And the men who made their living from the sea, who understood the water and respected its moods, knew when to walk away. Knew when the risk stopped being worth the reward. I should have left with them. Should have listened to that instinct that kept screaming at me to get off the bay. But I stayed. Pride, stubbornness, the mortgage on my house in Bellingham, the child support I owed, the belief that I could handle whatever came, that I'd seen enough in my years on the water to deal with strange fish and spooked crews. Then the dream started. Every night, the same dream. I was underwater, swimming deep. The water was cold and green, and I could see clearly despite the murk. Schools of salmon surrounded me. Thousands of them. And they were all watching me with human eyes. Eyes I recognized. My father, his eyes. My grandfather, his eyes. The eyes of fishermen I known who died at sea. And Eddie, his eyes. Always Eddie, his eyes. Right in front of me. Staring into mine. Trying to tell me something. Trying to warn me. I'd wake up gasping. My lungs burning like I'd actually been holding my breath underwater. My sheets soaked not with sweat but with something that smelled like the sea. Salt and fish and deeper things. And I'd find sand in my bed. Actual sand. Beach sand. Despite being on a boat anchored in the middle of Bristol Bay, miles from shore. Tommy was having the same dreams. He told me on July 3rd. We were hauling nets in the early morning fog when he finally admitted what was happening to him. The drowning dreams. The sensation of breathing water. The voices he heard underwater. Voices speaking in that clicking language the salmon used. Voices that he somehow understood even though the words weren't to English. Weren't to any human language. The voices told him to come home. To return to the water. To stop fighting what he was becoming. I told him we were done. That we fished one more day to have enough money for fuel and then we were leaving. Going back to Washington and never coming back. He agreed. Seemed relieved. We set one final net in the early afternoon. Waited the regulation time. Started to haul it in. The net was impossibly heavy. Heavier than any catch I ever pulled. The hydraulic winch strained. The boom groaned. I thought we'd snagged a submarine or a boulder or something that was going to pull us under. But when the net broke the surface, it was salmon. Nothing but salmon. Packed so dense we couldn't see the mesh. Thousands of them. More than should have been possible. More than the net could hold. And they were all perfectly still. All facing the boat. All watching with those human eyes. Tommy started screaming. Not words, just this high-pitched keening sound like a pressure valve releasing. He grabbed his head and fell to his knees. Blood ran from his nose. From his ears. His eyes rolled back showing only whites. And the salmon. The salmon started clicking, all of them, in perfect synchronization. The sound was overwhelming. It vibrated through the hull, through my bones, through my skull. I could feel it in my teeth, in my sinuses, in the soft tissue of my brain. The net fell back into the water. Just dropped. The winch hadn't. T released it. The boom hadn't. T failed. It just fell, like the weight had suddenly increased beyond what the equipment could hold. And Tommy stopped screaming, stood up, walked to the rail. His movements were wrong. Too fluid, too smooth, like he was floating slightly above the deck instead of walking on it. I grabbed him, tried to pull him back. He turned his head to look at me and his eyes had changed. The whites were gone, just solid black from edge to edge, like a shark. His eyes, like a doll. His eyes. And his mouth opened wider than it should have been able to open. Wider than the human jaw allows. I could see down his throat, could see something moving in there, something that pulsed and clicked and definitely wasn't human anatomy. He went over the side, didn't. He jumped, didn't. He fall, just stepped off like he was walking down a staircase. Disappeared into the green water without a splash, without a ripple, like the bay had opened up to swallow him. I ran to the rail, looked down into the water, and saw him sinking, not struggling, not drowning, just sinking peacefully with his arms at his sides and his head tilted back. Sinking toward a massive school of salmon that waited below. Thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, all with their human eyes turned upward, all watching him descend, all opening their mouths in welcome. The clicking stopped, the bay went silent, and I was alone on the North Star with the certainty that I was next. That whatever had taken Tommy was coming for me. That the dreams weren't just dreams. They were preparation. They were the salmon getting inside my head, changing me, making me ready to join them in the deep. I radioed the Coast Guard, reported a man overboard. They came, searched for 2 days, never found Tommy. This body. The official report said he drowned. Accidental death during commercial fishing operations. They asked if he'd been drinking, if he'd been depressed, if there had been any signs he was suicidal. I said no to everything. Didn't. He mentioned the eyes or the clicking or the way he walked off the boat like he was being called home. Because they wouldn't have believed me. Because I barely believed it myself. I sold the North Star the day after the Coast Guard closed their investigation. Sold it for half what it was worth to the first buyer who did take it. Flew back to Washington and never looked at the ocean again. Never went near water deeper than a bathtub. Never ate fish. Never talked about what happened. Not to my ex-wife. Not to my son. Not to the therapist the insurance company made me see after I started having panic attacks in the fishing gear department at Walmart. But I kept track, kept watching the news from Alaska, kept checking for reports of strange catches or missing fishermen or anything that might indicate the phenomenon was continuing. And for the rest of 1984, nothing. The salmon ran normal. The catches were good. The season ended in late July like it always did. And by 1985, everyone had decided that 84 had been an anomaly. A weird year. Nothing more, except it wasn't nothing. Because Tommy wasn't the only one who went into the water that season. 12 commercial fishermen disappeared in Bristol Bay between June and July of 1984. 12 men vanished from their boats during calm weather. Left their clothes on deck. Left their boots placed neatly side by side. Left wet footprints leading to the rail. Leading down into the water. Leading to schools of salmon that shouldn't have been there. That weren't on any fish finder. That existed in water too deep for normal salmon behavior. But yep, IK elders knew what it was. An elder in Dillingham told me years later, after I finally worked up the courage to go back to Alaska and ask questions. Told me about the old stories. About times in the past when the salmon came back wrong. When they had the eyes of drowned people. When they carried the souls of those who'd been taken by the sea. But yep, IK knew not to fish during those times. Knew not to eat the salmon. Knew not to even look at them too long because the eyes would trap you. Would call you. Would make you want to join them in the cold green depths where the drowned lived forever. He said it happened every few generations. The sea gets hungry, gets tired of giving, gets jealous of the people who take from it without ever giving back. So it reaches up, it touches the salmon, it fills them with the consciousness of everyone it has ever taken. Everyone who has ever drowned or been lost or buried at sea. It sends them back up the rivers, back to the places where people live. And it waits to see who is foolish enough to look. To listen, to answer when the clicking calls their name. The elder said 1984 was mild. That in his grandfather's time, entire villages had emptied. People had walked into the rivers and never come back, had answered the call and gone home to the sea. He said we were lucky it only lasted one season. Lucky it only took 12. Because it could have been so much worse. I think about Eddie constantly. About whether his eyes in that first salmon were random or intentional. Whether the sea had recognized me. Whether it had used my brother, this memory to hook me. To reel me in. To make me vulnerable to the call. I think about how close I came to following Tommy over that rail. How badly I wanted to in those final days before I fled. How the dreams still come sometimes. Less frequent now. Less intense. But still there. Still pulling. Still calling me home to the water where the salmon swim with human eyes and the drowned wait in eternal cold. Bristol Bay still runs. Still produces millions of salmon every year. Still feeds the world. And maybe the fish are normal now. Maybe whatever happened in 1984 was truly an anomaly. A single season of horror that will never repeat. But I don't believe that. I think the sea is patient. I think it is always hungry. And I think every salmon that comes out of that water carries a tiny piece of something that shouldn't to exist. Something that remembers. Something that waits. Something that will, someday, come back. If you eat wild-caught Alaskan salmon, look at it before you cook it. Really look at it. Check the eyes if the head is still attached. And if you see something that looks too human, too aware, too much like recognition, don't to eat it. Don't to even touch it. Throw it away. Burn it if you can, because the sea marks what it claims. And once they've been marked. Once they looked into those eyes and felt the pull, you were never really free. You were just counting down the days until the clicking calls your name and you walk down to the water and go home to where the drowned are waiting. I am dying now. The cancer is eating my lungs. Soon I'll be gone. And I wonder if the sea will finally get what it wanted from me. If when they scatter my ashes off the coast like they requested, the salmon will be waiting below. If I'll sink down into their midst and finally understand what Tommy understood in those last moments. What Eddie might have understood when his ashes hit the water. What all 12 of those fishermen understood as they stepped off their boats and descended into the green. Maybe death will answer the questions I've been too afraid to ask. Maybe I'll finally learn what the clicking means. What the salmon were trying to tell us. What waits in the deepest parts of Bristol Bay where the light doesn't to reach and the water stays cold all year long. Or maybe I'll just be dead. Just ash in memory. Just another name on a list of fishermen who worked the bay and left. Nothing mystical. Nothing supernatural. Just the end of a life spent on the water. The natural conclusion to a story that started in grief and ended in silence. But I don't think so. I think the sea remembers. I think it's been waiting 40 years for me to come back. And I think when I finally return, the salmon will be there with their human eyes and their clicking language. And this time, I won. Run. This time, I'll finally answer. Finally go home. Finally join my brother and my crew and all the others who heard the call and couldn't resist. The summer of 1984 never really ended for me. It just paused. And soon, very soon, it's going to start again. Story 3. Invisible storm on March 14, 2001. Every single person in the fishing village of Port Lions on Kodiak Island lost their mind at exactly the same moment. And I was one of them. My name is Michael Garrett. I was the assistant harbor master. 32 years old, married, 2 kids, normal guy living a normal life in a town of 200 people on the edge of the world. We processed fish, we maintained boats, we survived the brutal Alaska winters and made jokes about the weather. Until the day we all saw something that wasn't to dare. It started at 4:17 in the afternoon. I know the exact time because I was checking the harbor logs when every watch, every clock, every digital display in town stopped. Just froze at 4:17, like time itself had hit a wall. Then the screaming started. Not one person, everyone, all at once. 200 voices rising in perfect unison. A sound that shouldn't be possible. That shouldn't happen outside of nightmares. A chorus of pure terror with no coordination. No warning, just instant, synchronized panic. I dropped my clipboard, ran outside. The harbor was chaos. People running, pointing at empty air, swatting at nothing, fighting invisible attackers. My boss, Frank, was on the dock. A man I'd known for 6 years. Calm, steady, the kind of guy who talked down bar fights and weather storms without breaking a sweat. He was on his knees, covering his head with his hands, screaming about things tearing him apart. There was nothing touching him, nothing near him, Just empty space and Frank's terror. I ran toward him, made it maybe 10 steps before I felt it. The air changed, got thick, heavy, like atmospheric pressure had suddenly tripled. My ears popped, my vision blurred. And then I saw them. Shapes, moving through the air, transparent, almost invisible, like heat shimmer over asphalt, but with purpose, with intention. Dozens of them, hundreds maybe, flowing through the village like a current, like a school of fish made of distorted air. They had form. I could see outlines, something like bodies, something like limbs, but they kept shifting, changing, never holding a consistent shape for more than a second. One passed within inches of my face. I felt wind, felt displacement, felt something solid moving through space that my eyes insisted was empty. Then it touched me. The sensation was wrong, fundamentally wrong, like being grabbed by hands that existed in too many directions at once. Fingers that pressed into my skin from angles that shouldn't be possible. I felt pressure on my chest, my back, my sides all simultaneously. Like I was being held from every direction. I screamed. Couldn't. To help it, the touch was violating, invasive, like something was reaching into me, through me, searching for something inside. I swung at it. My fist passed through empty air. But I felt impact, felt resistance, felt something solid crack under my knuckles even though nothing was there. The pressure released. The shape moved away, retreated back into the swarm of distorted air flowing through the village. Around me, everyone was fighting the same battle, attacking invisible enemies, running from nothing, screaming at empty space. But we all felt it, all saw the same shimmer, all experienced the same impossible touch. Mrs. Chen ran past me. She was 70 years old, kindest woman in town, always brought cookies to the harbor office. She had a fishing knife, was slashing at the air in front of her. Her face was twisted in rage and terror. She was screaming about her children, about things trying to take her children. Her kids had been dead for 20 years, lost in a boating accident. But in that moment, to her, they were there, being threatened, being stolen by invisible horrors only she could see. I tried to grab her, stop her before she hurt herself, but more shapes swarmed between us. I felt them press against me. Dozens of touches, hundreds, all over my body, searching, probing, looking for something. I fell to my knees. The weight was too much, the pressure too intense. I couldn't to breathe, couldn't to think, could only feel those impossible hands reaching into places hands shouldn't to reach. Then I heard the sound, not through my ears, inside my head, a frequency that bypassed my eardrums and resonated directly in my skull. Like tinnitus but worse, deeper, more invasive. It had rhythm, had pattern, almost like language, like something was trying to communicate. But the meaning was alien, wrong. My brain couldn't to process it, couldn't to translate the patterns into anything comprehensible. It was like trying to read a book written in colors instead of words. The information was there, but the format was impossible. The sound got louder, more insistent. I felt it vibrating in my teeth, in my bones, in the soft tissue of my brain. And then I understood, not the words, not the message, but the intent. These things were searching, had been searching for a long time, looking for something specific, something they lost, something they needed. They thought we had it, thought it was inside us, hidden in our bodies, in our minds, in whatever makes humans different from empty space. They were wrong. We didn't. They have what they wanted, but they couldn't accept that, couldn't comprehend that possibility. So they kept searching, kept reaching, kept violating every person in the village, looking for something that wasn't there. The shapes pressed closer. I was surrounded, buried in distorted air and impossible touch. I couldn't see the village anymore, couldn't see other people. Just the shimmer, just the flow of transparent bodies searching, endlessly searching. My vision started to fade. Not darkness, something else, like I was being pulled somewhere, dragged into whatever space these things existed in. The place between air molecules, the gaps in reality, the nowhere that somehow somewhere. I was almost gone when the sound stopped. Instant silence. The frequency cut off like someone flipped a switch. The pressure vanished. The shapes retreated, flowed away like water finding a drain. Within seconds, the air was clear, normal, empty. I was lying on the dock, gasping. My clothes were torn. I had scratches on my arms, my face, my chest. But they weren't cuts. They were burns, like frostbite but without the cold. Like something had frozen the top layer of my skin without changing the temperature. Around me, the village was silent. Everyone was down, on the ground, on the docks, in the streets, 200 people scattered like toys abandoned by a child. Some were moving, groaning. Most were just lying there, staring at the sky with empty eyes. I got up slowly. Everything hurt. My joints felt wrong, loose, like something had taken me apart and put me back together slightly incorrectly. Frank was still on the dock, still on his knees, but he was quiet now, rocking back and forth. His lips were moving, but no sound came out. His eyes were wide, unfocused, looking at something the rest of us couldn't see anymore. I checked the others. Everyone was physically intact. No major injuries beyond the burns and some bruising. But everyone had that same look, that same empty stare, like something had been taken, or something had been left behind. The clock started again, all at once, jumped from 4:17 to 4:19. 2 minutes had passed, or we lost 2 minutes, or time had broken and repaired itself and we had been caught in the gap. Nobody knows. Nobody can explain it. The authorities came. State police, federal investigators, military personnel in unmarked vehicles. They interviewed everyone, took samples, analyzed the air, the water, the ground, looked for toxins, gas leaks, chemical spills, anything that could cause mass hallucination. They found nothing. No environmental factors, no contaminants, no physical explanation for why an entire village simultaneously lost their grip on reality. The official report called it mass hysteria, collective delusion triggered by isolation and stress, the kind of psychological contagion that happens in tight-knit communities. Rational, scientific, completely wrong, because we all saw the same thing, all felt the same thing, all had the same burns, the same pattern of scratches, in the same locations. Mass hysteria doesn't leave physical evidence, doesn't synchronize to the second, doesn't stop clocks. The village never recovered. Most people moved away within a year. Couldn't stand being there anymore. Couldn't shake the feeling that something was still searching, still reaching, still trying to find what it had lost. I stayed longer than most, tried to maintain normalcy, tried to convince myself it was over. But the burns never fully healed. They fade for a while, then come back. The same pattern, the same locations, like something was marking us, keeping track. And the sound returned, not often, maybe once a month, once a week toward the end. That frequency in my skull, that impossible language trying to communicate, trying to explain what it wanted. I started understanding more, not the words, but the feeling behind them. These things weren't malicious, weren't trying to hurt us. They were desperate, frantic, had lost something precious, something vital, and they thought we'd taken it, or that we were it. I left Port Lions in 2003, moved to Anchorage, got a new job, started therapy, tried to forget, but the burns kept coming back, and the sound never fully stopped. Just got quieter, background noise in my skull that I learned to ignore. Until 3 months ago, I was walking downtown when the air changed, got thick, heavy, my ears popped, and I saw them again. The shapes, the shimmer, flowing between buildings, moving through crowds, searching. Nobody else reacted. Nobody else saw them. Just me. And a woman across the street who stopped walking, who stood perfectly still, staring at nothing, who had the same expression I'd seen on Frank, his face 23 years ago. She had burns on her arms. The same pattern, the same locations. I walked over, asked if she was okay. She looked at me. Recognition dawned in her eyes. Not of me specifically, but of what I represented. Someone else who'd seen him. Someone else who'd been touched. She grabbed my hand. Her skin was cold. The burns on her arm were fresh, still smoking slightly. She asked if I heard them. Asked if they were still looking. Asked if I knew what they wanted. I told her the truth, that I didn't know, that nobody knows. She started crying, said they'd come to her house in Fairbanks 2 weeks ago, flowed through her bedroom in the middle of the night, touched her, searched her, left her with burns and that sound in her head. She said they were spreading, moving beyond Kodiak Island, following some trail only they could detect, looking for something, getting more desperate, more frequent. Since then, they found 12 others, people scattered across Alaska, all with the same story, all with the same burns, all hearing the same impossible frequency. And we're not alone anymore. Reports are coming from Washington, Oregon, British Columbia, people describing invisible attacks, unexplained burns, sounds only they can hear, mass panic events in small towns with no explanation. Whatever happened in Port Lions in 2001 wasn't isolated, wasn't finished. It was the beginning, the first search, the first attempt to find what they lost. They were still looking, still searching, and they were getting better at it. learning to exist in our space longer, learning to look deeper, learning to recognize the pattern they re-seeking. Last night, the frequency got loud again, louder than ever before, and for the first time, I understood actual words, actual meaning. They were not looking for a thing. They were looking for themselves, for pieces they lost, pieces that got separated when they crossed from wherever they exist into our reality. They think those pieces are inside us, merged with us, hiding in human bodies, in human minds, and they were not going to stop searching until they find them. Or until there is nothing left to search. The burns on my arms are permanent now. Don't to fade anymore. Just keep getting deeper, more intricate, like a map being drawn on my skin. Like directions to something, or coordinates for somewhere. The woman from Anchorage called me yesterday. Said the shapes came back. Said they were different this time. More solid, more visible, more determined. She said they pulled something out of her. Something she didn't she had. Something that felt essential, like a piece of her soul. And when it was gone, she felt hollow, empty, less than what she'd been. She asked if I thought they'd come for me next. If I had what they were looking for. If I was carrying a piece of them. I told her I didn't. Told her to stay safe. Told her to call if she needed anything. She didn't respond. Haven't heard from her since. Her phone goes straight to voicemail. Her apartment is empty. No signs of struggle. Just empty space where a person used to be. Like she was never there. Like something reached in and erased her completely. The frequency is constant now. Day and night. Words forming in my head. Instructions. Coordinates. Timetables. They reorganizing. Preparing. Planning something larger. And I am starting to feel it. That hollow sensation. Like something inside me T-mind. Like I'm carrying something that belongs somewhere else. Something that wants to go home. The air is thick tonight. My ears keep popping. And when I look in the mirror, I can see them. Behind me, around me, waiting, the shimmer, the shapes, the invisible things that search endlessly for what they lost. They were not invisible anymore. Not to me. I can see them clearly now. Can make out details, features, something almost like faces. And they re-smiling. Because they found it, found what they were looking for. Found the piece they lost in 2001 when they first touched down in Port Lions. It has been inside me the whole time. Growing, changing, becoming something new. Something that belongs to them but has lived in me for 23 years. They reaching for me now. Those hands from too many directions. That pressure from everywhere at once. But it doesn't hurt anymore. Doesn't feel wrong. It feels like coming home. Like returning to a place I didn't I left. Like filling a hollow I didn't existed. The burns on my arms are glowing. Bright, hot, not painful, just bright, showing the way, marking the path. I am not Michael Garrett anymore. Or maybe I was never fully Michael Garrett. Maybe they've been two things occupying one space. One human, one something else, merged, confused, lost, but not anymore. They found me, found their missing piece, and now they were taking me back to wherever they exist, to the space between spaces, to the nowhere that somehow everywhere. Port Lions was just the beginning, the first search, the first crossing, and what they left behind has been growing, spreading, preparing. 200 people touched, 200 pieces planted, 200 seeds waiting to bloom. We're waking up now. All of us, hearing the call, feeling the pull, understanding what we really are. The invisible storm is coming back. But this time, we're going with it. Story 4. Voices in the ground. I have 17 hours of audio recordings sitting in a safe deposit box in Anchorage. And if you listen to them with headphones in a quiet room, you will hear dozens of voices speaking a language that has never existed on Earth. My name is Michael Torres. I am 43 years old, a construction foreman from Sacramento who took a job in Fairbanks, Alaska because the pay was too good to pass up. We were building a new hotel complex on the south side of town, and the project was supposed to take 6 months. I quit after 3 weeks, left Alaska, and I will never go back. What we found in that frozen ground changed everything I thought I understood about the world we live in. It started on day 4 of excavation. We were digging the foundation, breaking through permafrost with jackhammers and heavy equipment. Permafrost is ground that stays frozen year-round, sometimes hundreds of feet deep. It is like concrete when frozen, a nightmare to work with. But that is what you deal with in Alaska. You adjust, you push through. Tommy Vargas was operating the excavator when he shut everything down mid-scoop. He climbed out of the cab looking pale, his hands shaking as he lit a cigarette. He told me he heard something. Voices coming from the ground. Multiple people talking. Their voices muffled but clear, like they were having a conversation just beneath the surface. I told him it was probably the equipment creating weird acoustics, sound bouncing off the frozen earth in strange ways. He did not look convinced, but he climbed back in and kept working. 20 minutes later, he shut down again. This time, 3 other crew members had heard it too. They were standing at the edge of the excavation pit, staring down into the dark earth, their faces tight with confusion. I walked down into the pit myself. The walls were a mix of frozen soil and ice, ancient ground that had not seen daylight in thousands of years. I stood there in the cold, listening. At first, nothing, just the distant sounds of traffic, the wind, the normal background noise of a construction site. Then I heard it, voices, faint but unmistakable, multiple people speaking, their words overlapping, like catching fragments of conversation from the next room. But there was no next room. There was nothing but solid frozen earth. The voices were coming from the ground itself. I pressed my ear against the frozen wall of the excavation. The voices became clearer. They were not speaking English, not Spanish, not any language I recognized. The cadence was wrong, the sounds too fluid, too many syllables packed into each word. But it was definitely language, structured, purposeful, communication. I pulled back, my heart pounding. The rest of the crew was staring at me, waiting for an explanation I did not have. I told everyone to take an early lunch, that we would resume work after I figured out what was causing the acoustic anomaly. But I knew it was not an anomaly. Something impossible was happening. I went to my truck and grabbed my phone. I have a voice recording app I use for work notes, documenting site conditions and safety issues. I went back down into the pit, pressed my phone against the frozen wall, and hit record. I stood there for 5 minutes, not moving, barely breathing, letting the phone capture whatever was down there. When I played it back, the voices were clear. Dozens of them. Men, women, what might have been children. All speaking that unknown language, their conversations overlapping and weaving together like they were in a crowded room. But there was something else underneath the voices. A low humming, almost below the range of human hearing, that made my teeth ache and my stomach turn. I should have stopped the excavation. Should have called someone, reported the anomaly, let experts figure out what was happening. But we were on a tight schedule, and I had a crew to manage and a reputation to maintain. I convinced myself it was some weird geological phenomenon, sound from somewhere else being transmitted through ice and rock in unusual ways. I told the crew we were pushing forward. That was my first mistake. Over the next 3 days, the voices got louder, and they started responding to us. When we broke through a new section of permafrost, the voices would surge, becoming agitated and intense. When we stopped working, they would quiet down, settling into a low murmur-like background conversation. It was as if they knew we were there, as if they were aware of what we were doing. The crew was getting spooked. 2 guys quit outright, packed their tools and drove back to Anchorage without even collecting their final paychecks. The rest were jumpy, making mistakes, looking over their shoulders constantly. I started recording everything. Every shift, every excavation session, I had my phone pressed against the frozen walls, capturing hours of audio. The language started to change. At first, it had been completely foreign. No recognizable words or sounds. But by day 6, I was catching fragments that sounded almost familiar. Words that might have been English, or something close to it. Like the voices were learning, adapting, trying to communicate with us in a way we might understand. On day 7, we broke through into a void. The excavator bucket punched through the frozen wall and dropped into empty space. We shut everything down and lowered lights into the hole. There was a cavity down there, about 15 feet across, the walls smooth and curved like it had been carved deliberately. The temperature inside was colder than the surrounding permafrost, cold enough that our breath froze instantly into ice crystals that hung in the air. And the voices were coming from inside the cavity, not muffled anymore, clear, loud, echoing off the curved walls like we had broken into an auditorium full of people. I climbed down into the cavity with 2 crew members, our headlamps cutting through the darkness. The walls were ice, but not normal ice. This was darker, almost black, with strange patterns running through it like veins or circuitry. The floor was smooth and sloped downward, disappearing into darkness beyond the reach of our lights. The voices surrounded us, coming from every direction, not from speakers or some mechanical source, but from the ice itself. The walls were vibrating with them, transmitting sound through frozen water that had been solid for millennia. I pressed my hand against the wall and felt it. Vibrations, pulses, like a heartbeat. One of the crew members, a guy named Karev, started backing toward the entrance. He was muttering something in Russian, his eyes wide and terrified. Then he screamed and pointed. In the ice wall, just barely visible in the beam of my headlamp, there was a shape. A figure, frozen in the black ice like an insect in amber. It was humanoid, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But wrong. The proportions were off. The limbs too long, the joints bending at angles that did not match human anatomy. The head was elongated, features obscured by the ice but suggesting something that was almost human but had taken a different evolutionary path. We found more of them. Dozens, hundreds. The deeper we looked into the cavity, the more figures we could see frozen in the walls. An entire population, preserved in ice, their mouths open like they were speaking. Like they had been speaking when the ice took them. The voices were theirs. Somehow, impossibly, the ice was playing back their last moments. Conversations frozen in time, trapped in the permafrost, waiting for someone to dig deep enough to hear them. We got out of that cavity fast. I sealed it off, told the crew we were shutting down pending a geological survey. Then I spent the night in my hotel room, listening to my recordings, trying to understand what I was hearing. The voices were clearer now. I could pick out individual speakers, follow their conversations even though I did not understand the words. And underneath it all, that low humming that made my head hurt and my vision blur. I started hearing the voices when I was not at the site. Faint whispers at the edge of my hearing, like someone talking in the next room. I would turn around, expecting to see someone behind me, but there was nobody there. The voices followed me, into my hotel room, into my truck, into the grocery store and the gas station and everywhere I went. They were not just recordings. They were something else, something alive, or something that had been alive once and was now existing in a state I did not have words for. Consciousness frozen in ice, preserved and aware, reaching out through time and space to anyone who got close enough to hear. I went back to the site alone one night. I needed to know, needed to understand what we had found. I climbed down into the cavity with my recording equipment, pressed the microphone against the ice, and listened. The voices were everywhere, but this time, I heard my name. Clear as day, spoken in that alien language but unmistakably my name. Michael. They were calling to me. I pulled back, my heart hammering. How did they know my name? How could frozen voices from thousands of years ago know who I was? Unless they were not from the past. Unless time worked differently down here in the frozen dark, and what we thought was ancient was actually something else entirely. The humming grew louder. The ice began to crack. Hairline fractures spreading across the walls, following those vein-like patterns I had noticed earlier. The temperature dropped so fast that my breath stopped coming out as vapor and started coming out as snow. And the voices changed. They were not speaking anymore. They were screaming. I ran, scrambled back up through the excavation pit and out into the night air. Behind me, I heard the ice continue to crack. The sound was like gunshots echoing through the frozen ground. I got in my truck and drove straight to my hotel, threw everything I owned into a bag, and was on the road to Anchorage within an hour. I called the site supervisor the next morning and quit. Told him I had a family emergency, needed to leave Alaska immediately. He was not happy, but he did not push. I think he was relieved. The whole crew had been ready to walk. The project shut down 2 days later. Official reason was unexpected geological conditions. The cavity was filled in with concrete and the site was abandoned. But I kept the recordings. 17 hours of audio, captured over 7 days of excavation. I have listened to them hundreds of times, trying to decode the language, trying to understand what those voices are saying. I have sent clips to linguists and audio experts and anyone I thought might be able to help. Nobody can identify the language. Nobody can explain the source of the sound. But I am starting to understand fragments. Words that repeat, patterns in the conversations. And what I am hearing terrifies me more than anything I have ever experienced. The voices are not from the past. They are warnings, messages sent backward through time, frozen in permafrost, waiting for someone to dig them up. They are telling us not to dig deeper, not to disturb what is frozen below. They are describing something that comes from beneath, something that has been locked away in the ice for reasons we do not understand. And they are saying we are running out of time, that the permafrost is melting, that what has been frozen is beginning to wake up. I still hear them sometimes, faint whispers at the edge of my hearing. And when I close my eyes, I see those figures frozen in the black ice, their mouths open, their warning caught in their throats for thousands of years, waiting for us to finally understand, before it is too late. You're still here. Good. Hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never lose the trail. Drop a comment with your location or your own creepy story. Alaska's whispers have a way of finding new ears. Story 5. Trees that walk. The last thing Ranger Mike Sullivan said over the radio was that the trees were moving. Not swaying, moving, walking when there wasn't any wind. Then the transmission cut to static, and we never heard from him or his partner again. My name is Dennis Carter. I was a park ranger at Denali National Park in Alaska for 11 years. I quit in October of 1987, 3 months after Mike and Janet disappeared near Wonder Lake. The official report says they got lost, that they probably fell into a ravine or succumbed to exposure. The search teams never found bodies, never found equipment, never found any trace that 2 experienced rangers had ever been in that area at all. But I know what happened to them. I know because I went looking, because I saw what they saw, and because I barely made it out with my mind intact. This is the truth, all of it. And if you ever go to Denali, if you ever hike past Wonder Lake into the back country, pay attention to the trees. Watch how they stand, watch how they move. And if you see one that doesn't belong, that wasn't there a moment ago, run. Don't to look back, don't to try to understand, just run. It started in early July. Wildlife started behaving strangely around Wonder Lake. Caribou abandoning their normal grazing areas. Bears moving through in larger numbers than usual, all heading south, away from the lake. Birds going silent in sections of forest that should have been full of sound. Local guides reported it first. Then hikers started complaining about feeling watched in certain areas, about seeing movement in their peripheral vision that vanished when they turned to look. Park management sent Mike and Janet to investigate. They were our best. Mike had 15 years in wilderness management. Janet was a wildlife biologist with a PhD. If anyone could figure out what was spooking the animals, it was them. They headed out on July 16th with enough supplies for 5 days. The plan was to hike the northern trail system, set up observation points, and document any unusual behavior. The first 3 days, their reports were normal. Standard wildlife observations. Nothing out of the ordinary except for the absence of smaller animals. No squirrels, no rabbits, no marmots. The forest was eerily quiet, but that could be explained by predator presence. Maybe a pack of wolves had moved through. Maybe a bear with cubs was denning nearby. Nothing that warranted serious concern. On day 4, Mike's voice over the radio sounded different. Strained. He reported finding trees that had fallen across the trail. Fresh falls. The wood was still green, still oozing sap, but the strange thing was how they'd fallen. No wind damage, no lightning strikes, no visible reason for healthy trees to suddenly topple. And they'd all fallen in the same direction, pointing away from Wonder Lake, pointing south, like they were trying to escape something. Janet came on the radio then, said they found tracks around the fallen trees, deep impressions in the soft ground. But not animal tracks. These were circular, about 8 inches across, dozens of them surrounding each fallen tree. She couldn't to identify them, couldn't to match them to any known species. The pattern was wrong, too regular, too deliberate, like something had stood around the trees before they fell, like something had been watching them. That was the last normal transmission, the last time they sounded like themselves, because on day 5, everything changed. Mike came on the radio just after dawn. His voice was barely a whisper. He said they spent the night near the lake shore. Said they'd taken turns on watch because something felt wrong. Janet had first shift. Around 2 in the morning, she woken him up. Told him to look at the tree line. Told him not to make any noise. And when he looked, he saw what she was seeing. The trees had moved, not the wind-moving branches. The actual trees had changed position. A line of spruce that had been maybe 50 yards from their camp was now 30 yards away. They moved closer while Mike was sleeping, moved in complete silence. And they were still moving, inch by inch, roots pulling free from the soil and replanting, trunks tilting forward, branches reaching. I thought he was joking at first. Some kind of prank to break the tension. But his voice had no humor in it. Only fear, raw, confused fear. He said they packed up in the dark, started hiking back toward the ranger station, but the trees followed them, stayed parallel to the trail, kept pace, and more were joining from deeper in the forest. Silent, patient, moving when they weren't being watched directly. Janet took the radio. She was crying, said the trees shouldn't be able to do this. That it violated everything she knew about biology and physics and reality. That she watched one pull its roots completely free, watched it take a step, an actual step, the root system moving like legs, like something that had evolved for walking but was pretending to be a tree. Then Mike, his voice again. Panic now, he said there were dozens of them, surrounding them on all sides, cutting off their escape routes. And the trees weren't all spruce anymore. There were birch and aspen mixed in, trees that shouldn't grow in these elevations, trees that didn't match the local ecosystem, like they'd come from somewhere else, like they'd been walking for a long time. Collecting, gathering, building an army. The last thing we heard was Mike screaming. Not words, just pure terror. And underneath it, a sound I'll never forget. A creaking, like old wood under stress, but rhythmic, purposeful. The sound of trees walking, the sound of roots tearing through soil, the sound of branches reaching and grasping and pulling. Then static, just empty static that lasted for hours. We tried calling back, sent emergency signals, got nothing. By noon, the park superintendent had organized a search and rescue operation. 12 rangers and volunteers, helicopters, search dogs, everything we had. I was part of the first ground team. We hiked in from the south, following the route Mike and Janet had taken. Found their first 3 campsites exactly where they reported. Found the fallen trees Mike had described. Found those strange circular tracks pressed deep into the earth. But we didn't find them. Didn't find their gear. Didn't find any sign of struggle. The forest had swallowed them completely. The search lasted 6 days. We covered every inch of terrain within a 10-mile radius of their last known position. The helicopters flew grid patterns. The dogs found nothing to track. It was like Mike and Janet had simply vanished, like they never existed. On day 7, the superintendent called it off, declared them lost and presumed dead, started the paperwork to notify their families. But I couldn't let it go. I heard the transmission, heard the terror in their voices, heard that creaking sound, and I needed to know what had happened. Needed to see for myself. So 2 weeks after the official search ended, I went back. Alone, against protocol, against common sense. I packed light, took a radio, told no one where I was going. I reached Wonder Lake at sunset. The water was perfectly still, mirror smooth, reflecting the mountains and the sky. Beautiful in that way Alaska is beautiful, vast and indifferent and ancient. I made camp on the shore, built a fire, tried to convince myself I was on a routine patrol, that there was nothing to be afraid of, that trees done, to walk and experience rangers done, vanish without a trace. Around midnight, the fire died down to embers. I was half asleep when I heard it. That creaking sound from the radio. Distant but unmistakable. Wood moving against wood. Roots pulling free. I sat up, grabbed my flashlight, swept the beam across the tree line. Nothing moved. The forest stood silent and still. But I could feel it. That pressure of being watched. That animal instinct that screams danger even when you can see the threat. I packed up, didn't wait for morning. Started hiking back toward the ranger station using my flashlight in the faint glow of the moon. And that is when I realized the trail had changed. Trees I didn't remember blocked the path. A grove of aspen where there should have been open ground. A line of spruce forming a wall where I walked through easily on my way in. The forest was rearranging itself, closing off my escape route, hurting me. I tried going cross-country, pushed through underbrush and scrambled over rocks. But everywhere I went, trees appeared. Not suddenly, gradually. One moment an area would be clear. The next time I looked, a tree would be there. Standing, waiting, watching. I could see them moving in my peripheral vision. Could see the roots flexing, the trunks tilting, the branches reaching toward me like hands. But when I looked directly, they were still. Just trees. Just normal trees that happened to be in my way. That happened to be forming a circle around me. That happened to be closing in. I ran, crashed through the forest without caring about the noise. Without caring about the branches that tore at my face and clothes. I just needed out. Needed to break through the circle before it sealed completely. And I made it, barely. Found a gap between 2 birch trees and threw myself through. Felt bark scrape my shoulders. Felt roots grasp at my ankles. Felt the forest itself trying to hold me back. I didn't stop running until I reached the road. Collapsed on the pavement. Stayed there until a park maintenance truck found me at dawn. I was hypothermic, delirious, covered in scratches and bruises. They took me to the hospital in Fairbanks. Kept me for observation. A psychiatrist asked gentle questions about stress and isolation. About whether I'd been drinking. about why I'd gone into the wilderness alone. I told them about the trees, about Mike and Janet, about how the forest had moved and changed and tried to trap me. They nodded, made notes, increased my medication, and I realized they thought I had a breakdown, that the stress of losing my colleagues had cracked something in my mind, that the trees were a delusion, a manifestation of guilt and grief. Maybe they were right. Maybe I did hallucinate the whole thing. Maybe the forest at night played tricks on me. Maybe fear and exhaustion created something that wasn't real. But I don't think so. Because when I finally went back to my ranger station to collect my things before I quit, I found something that made my blood run cold. A photograph, taken by a hiker 2 days after Mike and Janet disappeared. The hiker had been trying to photograph a moose near Wonder Lake. Didn't get the moose, but the background of the photo showed the tree line. And there, among the spruce and birch, were two trees that didn't match. Two trees with shapes that looked almost human, tall and thin, with branch patterns that resembled arms, with root systems that looked like they were mid-step. And if you looked closely, if you really studied the bark, you could see patterns. Faces, screaming faces pressed into the wood like they were trying to push through from inside. I burned the photograph, never told anyone about it, because what good would it do? Who would believe that Mike and Janet hadn't died or gotten lost? That they'd been taken, absorbed, transformed into whatever those things were, into trees that walked, into something that mimicked the forest while hunting in it. The official file on their disappearance is still open, technically, but nobody is looking for them anymore. Nobody goes to that part of Denali if they can help it. The trails near Wonder Lake are officially closed for bear activity. The real reason is that 3 more people have vanished in that area since 1987. Different years, different seasons, but always the same result. People go in, people don't, to come out. And the forest gets a little denser, a little darker, a little more wrong. I live in Oregon now, as far from Alaska as I could manage while staying in the Northwest. I don't to hike anymore. Don't to camp. Don't to go anywhere that trees outnumber people. And I tell this story to anyone who will listen. Not because I think you'll all believe me, but because maybe it'll save someone. Maybe someone planning a trip to Denali will hear this and decide to stay on the main roads. To avoid Wonder Lake. To not investigate if they hear creaking in the forest at night. The trees are still there, still walking, still hunting, still adding to their numbers. And someday, maybe someday soon, there'll all be enough of them. Enough to leave the park. Enough to spread. Enough to remind us that we're not the dominant species on this planet. That we never were. That we're just visitors in a world that tolerates us until it doesn't. Until the forest decides it's had enough. Until the trees remember how to walk. Until they come for us all, patient and silent and inevitable as winter. Story 6. Crimson Sky. The rain that fell on Cordova, Alaska in October 1995 wasn't tea water. And what it left behind in our minds was worse than anything it left on our streets. My name is Daniel Cross. I was the assistant chief at Cordova's volunteer fire department. 39 years old, born and raised in this fishing town of 2,500 people clinging to Prince William Sound. I thought I'd seen everything Alaska could throw at us. Earthquakes, tsunamis, storms that could flip a trawler like a toy. I was wrong. October 23rd started normal. Cold, overcast, typical fall weather. I was at the station doing equipment checks when the emergency line lit up. Multiple calls, people reporting something wrong with the sky, something wrong with the clouds. I stepped outside, looked up. The clouds were moving wrong, not drifting with the wind, churning, rotating, like water going down a drain. The color was off too. Not gray, not black, something between rust and burgundy, like old blood diluted in water. Then the first drops fell. Red, thick, heavier than rain should be. They hit the pavement and didn't splash. They stuck, spread, left stains that looked organic, alive. Within minutes, it was pouring. A downpour of crimson liquid that coated everything. Cars, buildings, streets. The harbor turned pink as the rain mixed with seawater. The fishing boats looked like they'd been splashed with paint. I radioed the police chief, asked if we should sound an alarm. Evacuate. Something. He didn't. Nobody knew. This wasn't in any emergency manual. Wasn't in any training scenario. The rain lasted 47 minutes, then stopped as suddenly as it started. The clouds dispersed, clear sky emerged, like nothing had happened, except the entire town was covered in red, Every surface, every vehicle, every building, and the smell. God, the smell. Metallic, organic, like a slaughterhouse mixed with something chemical, something that shouldn't exist in nature. We collected samples, sent them to the state lab in Juneau, sent them to the CDC, sent them everywhere we could think of. Everyone wanted answers, wanted to know what had fallen from the sky, whether it was dangerous, whether we needed to evacuate. The initial reports came back confused. The liquid contained biological material, proteins, amino acids, cell fragments, but the structure was wrong. Didn't match any known organism. Plant, animal, or otherwise. The DNA sequencing showed patterns that shouldn't be possible. Repeating sections that looked almost mathematical. Deliberate. One lab technician called me directly. Off the record, said the sample reminded her of blood, but blood from something that wasn't built like anything on Earth. Blood from something that had too many chromosomes. Too complex, too organized. She asked if anyone in Cordova had gotten sick, had shown symptoms, had acted strangely. I told her no, everyone seemed fine, shaken but fine, just wanted the red stuff cleaned off their property, wanted life to return to normal. I was lying. Even then, I knew something was wrong, because that night, I had the dream. I was standing in water, dark water, ocean deep, but I could breathe, could see clearly despite no light source. And I wasn't alone. Thousands of people surrounded me, all standing in the water, all perfectly still, all facing the same direction, looking up at something I couldn't see. Something above the water, something huge. I tried to move, couldn't. My body wouldn't respond. I was locked in place like everyone else, waiting, watching, knowing something was coming. Then the water turned red. Not gradually, all at once, like someone had flipped a switch, and the people started sinking. Not drowning, just descending, slowly, peacefully, into the crimson depths. I tried to scream, tried to swim, tried to do anything, but I just sank with the others, down into red water that got thicker, heavier, more like syrup, more like blood. I woke up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, heart hammering. It was 3 a.m. I grabbed my phone to call someone, tell someone, then stopped, because I heard voices outside, lots of voices, all saying the same thing, over and over, a phrase I didn't recognize, words that sounded almost like English but weren't. I looked out my window. People were in the streets, dozens of them, standing in their yards, on their porches, in the middle of the road, all facing the same direction, all chanting that same phrase. I recognized my neighbors, the Johnsons, the Martinez family, old Mr. Peterson who lived in Cordova for 60 years, all standing in the cold October night, all chanting, all facing north toward the mountains. I threw on clothes and ran outside, tried to talk to them, tried to shake them awake. Nothing worked. They just kept chanting, eyes open but unseeing, like sleepwalkers, like puppets. The chanting lasted maybe 5 minutes, then stopped. Everyone blinked, looked around confused, started asking what they were doing outside, why they were cold, what had happened. Nobody remembered. Not the chanting, not walking outside, not standing in formation, just waking up in the street with no idea how they got there. The fire chief called an emergency meeting. Town hall was packed. Everyone had experienced the same thing, the same dream, the same sleepwalking, the same chanting. We compared notes. The dream was identical for everyone. Same water, same people, same red transformation, same sinking, word for word, image for image, like we all watched the same movie. That is not how dreams work. Dreams are personal, unique. Even shared trauma doesn't to create identical nightmares across an entire population. The state sent a crisis counselor. She listened to our accounts, took notes, recommended we seek professional help, suggested mass hysteria triggered by the strange rainfall, collective anxiety manifesting as shared delusion. But she couldn't explain the chanting, couldn't explain how 2,000 people simultaneously sleepwalked into the streets and recited the same unknown phrase. Couldn't explain the biological impossibility of the red rain. The dreams continued. Every night, same scenario, same ending. After a week, people started recognizing each other in the dreams. Started understanding that we were actually there together, sharing the same mental space, same nightmare, and the water was getting deeper. Each night, we sank a little further. The red got a little thicker. The thing above the surface got a little closer. I started documenting everything, keeping a journal, recording the details before they faded. I needed evidence, needed proof this was real, needed something to show the authorities who kept insisting this was psychological. 2 weeks after the rain, things got worse. People started seeing red, not figuratively, Literally, their vision would tint crimson for a few seconds, a few minutes, like looking through colored glass, like the red rain had stained something inside their eyes. I experienced it during a call, structure fire at the cannery. I was inside, searching for hot spots, when everything went red. Not dark, not smoky, just red, like the world had been dipped in blood. I could see perfectly, better than before, actually. Could make out details I missed. Could see heat signatures through walls. Could track air currents by watching distortions in the red haze. I found 3 people trapped in a back room. People I wouldn't have found with normal vision. Saved their lives because I could see in red. Others reported similar experiences, enhanced perception, heightened senses, but only when the world turned crimson. Only when the filter dropped over reality. The lab reports kept coming back stranger. They found something in the biological samples. Something that shouldn't be there. Prions, misfolded proteins, but not the destructive kind that caused disease. These ones were organized, structured, like they were building something, creating new neural pathways, rewriting brain chemistry. Everyone who had been exposed to the rain was changing. Slowly, subtly, but changing. The dreams evolved. We weren't just sinking anymore. We were being transformed. Our bodies changing in the red water. Growing new organs, new limbs, new senses, becoming something else. Something adapted to exist in that crimson depth. And we could feel it in our waking hours. Strange sensations, phantom limbs, urges to dive deep, to seek pressure, to find the bottom of whatever ocean we were becoming part of. The thing above the surface revealed itself on the 31st night. November 22nd, exactly 1 month after the red rain. In the dream, we sunk deep enough. The water was so thick with red we could barely move, could barely breathe even though we didn't need to breathe anymore. And the thing descended. It was huge, incomprehensible, not a creature, not a machine, something between, something that existed in more dimensions than we could perceive. We saw fragments, pieces, sections that made sense and sections that didn't. It had appendages, hundreds of them, reaching down into the red water, into us, through us, and it was harvesting, taking something, extracting some essence we didn't. We had. I felt it pull, felt something inside me stretch, start to tear loose. Whatever made me Daniel Cross was being removed. Slowly, carefully, like a surgeon extracting a tumor. And I understood. We all understood in that moment. The red rain wasn't to weather, wasn't too natural. It was a medium, a carrier, a way to prepare us, to change us, to make us compatible with whatever this thing needed. We were being cultivated, processed, turned into something useful for an entity we couldn't comprehend. And we had been cooperating, had been participating in our own transformation without realizing it. I woke up screaming. So did everyone else in Cordova. 2,000 voices crying out simultaneously. A sound that echoed across the town, across the water, into the mountains. The crisis counselor left the next day. Said she couldn't help us. Said what we were experiencing was beyond her training. Beyond anyone, this training. She recommended evacuation. Recommended we leave Cordova and never come back. Some people left, maybe 300, packed up their things and fled. But most stayed, because we couldn't leave. Not really. We were connected now, bound to this place, to each other, to whatever was happening in our shared dreams. The red episodes became constant. Most of us lived in that crimson-filtered reality more than in normal sight. And we started communicating through it, wordlessly, telepathically, sharing thoughts and feelings and information without speaking. We were becoming a collective, a hive, individual minds merging into something larger, something connected to that thing in the depths. That harvester, that transformer. I am writing this while I still can, while I still have enough individual thought to form words, to warn others. The red rain wasn't isolated to Cordova. They heard reports from other coastal towns, other fishing communities, other places where people live close to the water. It is spreading. The transformation, the preparation, whatever needs us is patient, is thorough, is turning humanity into something useful one town at a time. The dreams don't feel like nightmares anymore. They feel like home, like destiny, like evolution. We're becoming what we were always meant to be. Pieces of something larger. Cells in a vast organism that spans oceans and worlds and dimensions we can name. Tonight is the final descent. We all know it, can feel it. The thing in the depths is ready, has prepared us enough. Tonight, we sink completely. Tonight, we transform fully. Tonight, Daniel Cross stops existing and becomes part of something greater. I won. fight it? None of us will. We're ready. We've been ready since that first drop of red rain touched our skin, entered our pores, changed our cells. If you see red rain falling, dawn, to go outside. Dawn, let it touch you. Dawn, to breathe the mist. Dawn, to drink water that has been contaminated. Dawn, to make the mistake we made thinking it was just strange weather. Just an anomaly, just something to document and forget. It is a beginning, an infection, an invitation to join something vast and hungry and patient. Something that's been waiting in the deep places, in the spaces between dimensions, in the dark water where pressure turns bones to powder and light dies. We're going there tonight. All of us, the people of Cordova. We'll walk into Prince William Sound. We'll swim out to where the water turns deep. And we'll sink. Together. Forever. Becoming something new. Something red. Something that serves. The rain is starting again. I can see it from my window. Crimson drops falling from a clear sky. But only I can see it. Only we can see it. Those of us who have been prepared. Those of us who are ready. It is beautiful. It is calling. It is time. The water is waiting. The thing in the depths is ready to harvest what it has grown. And we're eager to give it what it needs. To become what we meant to be. Goodbye, Daniel Cross. Hello, Crimson Tide. Hello, Collective. Hello, Forever. Story 7. Tunnel that wasn't. I spent 3 hours trapped in a tunnel collapse that, according to every official record, never happened. And the rescue workers who pulled me out had no faces. My name is Jack Holloway. I am 48 years old. A sales representative from Seattle who drives through Alaska twice a year visiting clients. I have made the trip through the Whittier Tunnel dozens of times. It is the only road access to the town of Whittier, a single-lane tunnel carved through a mountain, 2.5 miles of darkness that you share with oncoming traffic on a timed schedule. You wait your turn, the light turns green, and you drive through. Simple, routine, except on October 16th of last year, when I drove into that tunnel and emerged into a nightmare that I am still trying to understand. The tunnel was clear when I entered. I was third in line, following a pickup truck and a sedan. The light had turned green, and we proceeded into the darkness. The tunnel walls are rough-cut rock, barely wide enough for a vehicle, the ceiling dripping with moisture and stained with decades of exhaust. Your headlights create a cone of light that gets swallowed by the blackness ahead. It is like driving into the throat of something massive and dead. I was about halfway through when the pickup truck ahead of me stopped. Not a gradual stop, but an immediate halt, brake lights flaring red in the darkness. I slammed on my brakes, stopping inches from his bumper. The sedan in front of him had stopped too. We sat there, engines idling, headlights reflecting off the wet rock walls, waiting for whatever had caused the holdup to clear. Then I heard it, a sound like thunder, but deeper, more visceral, the kind of sound you feel in your chest before your ears process it. The tunnel walls shook. Dust and small rocks began falling from the ceiling, rattling off my hood and windshield. And then, about 50 yards ahead, the tunnel collapsed. I watched it happen. A section of the ceiling came down in a massive cascade of rock and debris, filling the tunnel from floor to ceiling, blocking the exit completely. The sound was deafening even through my closed windows. A wall of dust rolled back toward us, engulfing the vehicles ahead and then mine, turning everything outside into a churning gray void. My first thought was clear and simple. I was going to die, trapped in a collapsed tunnel under a mountain, probably with dozens of tons of rock between me and open air in both directions. I grabbed my phone. No signal. Of course there was no signal. We were under a mountain. I could see the pickup truck ahead of me through the settling dust. The driver had gotten out and was standing next to his vehicle, staring at the collapse. The sedan driver emerged too, a woman in her 30s, her hand over her mouth. I got out of my car, my legs shaking, and walked forward to join them. The collapse was total. Massive boulders and broken rock filled the tunnel from wall to wall, ceiling to floor. There was no gap, no space we could crawl through. We were sealed in. I turned around and looked back the way we had come. The tunnel stretched into darkness behind us, but I could see more dust in the air back there, hanging like fog. Had the entrance collapsed too? Were we trapped from both sides? The pickup driver was a local, a guy in his 50s wearing a Carhartt jacket and a baseball cap. He told us to stay calm, that rescue crews would be coming, that the tunnel had sensors and monitoring systems that would have detected the collapse instantly. Help was probably already on the way. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. We waited. Time moved strangely in that darkness. My phone said 15 minutes had passed, but it felt like hours. The air was thick with dust, making it hard to breathe. I kept my headlights on, pointing at the collapsed section, giving us some light to see by. The woman from the sedan was crying quietly, sitting on the ground with her back against the tunnel wall. That was when we heard the voices, muffled and distant, coming from the other side of the collapse. Someone was there. Rescue workers, I assumed, already working to dig us out. Relief flooded through me. We were not abandoned. Help was coming. The pickup driver shouted, calling out that there were 3 of us trapped, that we were okay but needed to get out soon. The voices on the other side responded, but I could not make out the words. Just muffled sounds filtering through tons of rock. Then we heard digging, the scrape of shovels on stone, the clatter of rocks being moved. They were working fast, too fast. It should have taken hours, maybe days, to clear a collapse of that size. Heavy equipment. Careful work to avoid causing another collapse. But we could hear the pile of debris shifting, rocks tumbling down, gaps opening up in the wall of stone. Within 20 minutes, a small hole appeared near the top of the collapse, about 8 feet off the ground. Light shone through, flashlight beams cutting through the dust. A voice came through the hole. Clear now. It told us to move back, that they were going to widen the opening, that we would be out soon. The accent was strange, not quite American, not quite anything else. The words were right, but the pronunciation was slightly off, like someone who had learned English from a textbook but never spoke it with native speakers. The hole widened quickly. More rocks tumbled down, creating a gap large enough for a person to crawl through. One of the rescue workers appeared in the opening, silhouetted against the light behind him. He was wearing what looked like standard emergency gear. Reflective vest, hard hat, work gloves, but something was wrong with his face. I could not make out any features. His head was the right shape, but where there should have been eyes, nose, mouth, there was just smooth, featureless surface. Like looking at a mannequin, like his face had been erased. The woman from the sedan screamed. The pickup driver stepped back, his hand reaching for something on his belt. But the rescue worker spoke again, that same slightly off accent, telling us it was okay, that we were safe now, that we just needed to come through the opening one at a time. I stood frozen. My brain was trying to process what I was seeing, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a mask. Maybe it was some kind of protective gear for working in collapsed tunnels. Maybe the dust and poor lighting were creating an optical illusion. But my gut was screaming at me to run, to get back in my car and lock the doors, to hide. More rescue workers appeared behind the first one. 5 of them, all with the same featureless faces, all wearing identical gear. They climbed through the opening and dropped down into the tunnel with us, their movements smooth and coordinated. One of them approached the woman from the sedan, reaching out to help her up. She scrambled away from him, her screams echoing in the enclosed space. The pickup driver pulled a hunting knife from his belt and held it in front of him, telling them to stay back, demanding to know what they were. One of the faceless figures turned toward him, its head tilting in a gesture that might have been curiosity. Then it spoke, and this time I could hear that the voice was not coming from where a mouth should be. It was coming from everywhere, from the air itself, like the tunnel walls were speaking. It said we needed to leave, that we had been here too long, that the tunnel was not safe. I ran, did not think about it, did not plan it, just turned and sprinted back toward my car. Behind me, I heard the woman screaming again, heard the pickup driver shouting. I got to my car, threw myself into the driver's seat, locked the doors. Through the windshield, I could see the faceless figures moving toward the other 2, reaching for them with gloved hands. Then one of them turned and looked directly at me. Even without eyes, I could feel its attention lock onto me like a physical weight. It started walking toward my car. I started the engine, threw it in reverse, and floored the accelerator. My tires squealed on the wet tunnel floor as I shot backward into the darkness. The tunnel curved slightly, and I lost sight of the collapse and the faceless figures. I kept reversing, steering by the red glow of my taillights, praying I would not hit anything. My headlights were pointing forward, so I was driving blind into blackness. I do not know how long I drove in reverse. Maybe a minute, maybe 10. Time had stopped making sense. But eventually, I saw light behind me, the entrance to the tunnel. I burst out into daylight, spinning the wheel and slamming on the brakes. My car skidded to a stop in the staging area where vehicles wait for their turn to enter. There were people there, Real people with real faces. Traffic control workers, other drivers waiting their turn. They were staring at me like I had lost my mind, this maniac who had just come flying out of the tunnel in reverse. I got out of my car on shaking legs and tried to tell them what happened. About the collapse, about the people trapped inside, about the rescue workers with no faces. They looked at me like I was crazy. One of the traffic control workers told me there had been no collapse. The tunnel was clear. They had sensors that would detect any structural issues instantly. If there had been a collapse, alarms would be going off all over the place. I insisted, demanded they check, told them there were people trapped in there, that we needed to send real rescue crews. Finally, to humor me, one of them radioed to the other end of the tunnel. The response came back immediately. The tunnel was clear. A truck had just driven through from the Whittier side with no problems. They thought I was having some kind of episode. Exhaustion, maybe a medical issue. They wanted to call an ambulance. I refused, told them I was fine, that I just needed to get out of there. I got back in my car and drove to Anchorage, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard they cramped. I filed a police report the next day. They were polite but clearly skeptical. No collapse had been reported. No other drivers had mentioned any issues. The tunnel sensors had recorded nothing unusual at the time I claimed to have been trapped. They suggested I see a doctor, get checked for carbon monoxide exposure or some other explanation for the hallucination. But I knew what I had experienced. I had been trapped in that tunnel. I had seen the collapse. I had seen those faceless figures. It had been real. Then I started finding the others. Online forums, obscure websites dedicated to unexplained phenomena. People who had experienced the same thing. Different years, different times of day, but the same story. Trapped in a tunnel collapse that never officially happened. Rescued by workers with featureless faces who spoke in voices that came from everywhere and nowhere. One post was from 1973, scanned from an old newspaper article. A psychological study commissioned after multiple drivers reported identical experiences in the Whittier Tunnel. The study concluded it was mass hysteria, some combination of claustrophobia and the enclosed environment triggering shared delusions. But the researchers could not explain why the descriptions were so specific, so consistent across people who had never met or communicated. I found contact information for one of the people who had posted online. A woman named Jennifer who had experienced the collapse in 2008. We spoke on the phone for 2 hours. Her story was identical to mine. The sudden collapse, the impossibly fast rescue, the faceless workers. She told me she had tried to go back through the tunnel once, a few years later. She made it about halfway before panic overwhelmed her and she had to turn back. She said she could feel them in there, waiting, the faceless ones, like they existed in that space, in that darkness under the mountain. And occasionally they reached out and pulled people into whatever pocket of reality they inhabited. I have not been back to Alaska since. My company was understanding when I told them I needed to be reassigned. I take different routes now, fly when I can, avoid tunnels whenever possible. But sometimes, late at night when I am driving on a dark highway, I see them in my rearview mirror. Featureless faces in the cars behind me, heads turning to watch as I pass. They are always there, at the edge of my vision, reminding me that I saw something I was not supposed to see. That I was pulled into a place that exists alongside our reality, a pocket where the rules are different and things that should not be possible happen without explanation. And that somewhere under that mountain, the tunnel is still there. The one that collapsed and trapped me for 3 hours. The one that, according to every official record, has never collapsed at all. Waiting for the next person to drive through at just the wrong moment. To be pulled into that other place, where the faceless ones are waiting. Story 8. What swims beneath the thing that passed under my boat was bigger than a school bus. Bigger than 2 school buses. The shadow stretched from bow to stern and kept going, impossibly long, impossibly deep, moving through water that my sonar said was empty. My name is Russell Harding. I am a charter boat captain in Juneau, Alaska. Or I was. I sold my boat 3 weeks ago for a third of what it was worth, and I'm never going back on the water. Not in Alaska. Not anywhere, because I know what is down there now. What has always been down there. And once they've seen it, once it has seen you, the ocean stops being beautiful and starts being a mouth. A massive, patient mouth waiting to swallow everything. This ISN, to a story about whales. This ISN, to about some undiscovered species or a case of mistaken identity. This is about something that shouldn't to exist. Something that every captain in the Inside Passage knows about but one to discuss on land. One to admit in daylight. Because if you say it out loud, if you give it words and shape, it becomes real in a way that makes it impossible to ever feel safe again. I've been running charters out of Juneau for 16 years. Tourists wanting to see glaciers and whales and the raw beauty of Southeast Alaska. It's good money during the season. Steady work. I know these waters like I know my own house. Every channel, every reef, every current and tide pattern. The Inside Passage is complicated. Dangerous if you don't respect it, but predictable if you do. At least, I thought it was. The first time I saw one of the shadows was in May of last year. Early season. I had a family from Texas aboard. Parents and 2 teenage kids. We were heading north through Stevens Passage toward Tracy Arm Fjord. Beautiful day. Calm water. Perfect visibility. I was pointing at a pod of humpback whales about a quarter mile off the port side when my first mate, a guy named Connor, grabbed my arm and pointed straight down. The water in the passage is deep, hundreds of feet in places. The color is this dark greenish blue that makes it impossible to see more than 20 or 30 feet down on a good day. But something was visible, a shadow, massive and dark, moving parallel to our course about 50 feet below the surface. At first, I thought it was a whale, maybe a humpback swimming underneath us. But the shape was wrong. Too smooth, too uniform, and it was moving too fast. Way too fast. Whales don't sprint like that. Nothing that size should be able to move with that kind of speed. I checked the sonar. Nothing. The screen showed empty water. Just the bottom at 300 feet in our boat on the surface. No contacts in between, but I could see it with my own eyes. Could see the shadow keeping pace with us. Could see it growing larger. Getting closer to the surface. Connor saw it too. His face had gone pale. The tourists were still watching the humpbacks in the distance, completely oblivious to what was swimming directly beneath them. Then it just dropped straight down into the depths and vanished. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. The sonar never pinged it, never registered its presence at all. Connor and I looked at each other but didn't say anything. What could we say? That we'd seen something impossible? That the sonar had malfunctioned? We finished the tour, took the family back to Juneau. And that night at the bar where the charter captains hang out, I casually mentioned seeing a strange shadow in Stevens Passage. The conversation at the bar stopped. Every captain within earshot turned to look at me. Their faces were carefully neutral. Too neutral. After a long silence, an old-timer named Bill Hutchins asked me how big it was. I told him about the speed, about how the sonar didn't pick it up. He nodded slowly, took a long drink of his beer, then he told me to forget about it. To not mention it to tourists, to not make a big deal out of it, because if I did, if I started talking about things in the water that shouldn't be there, to get a reputation, people would think I was unreliable. Clients would dry up. The other captains would stop referring business to me. I pressed him, asked if he'd seen them too. He wouldn't. He answered directly, just said that the Inside Passage is old, deeper than most people realize, connected to trenches and chasms that go down miles into the earth. And sometimes things come up from those depths. Things that have always been there. Things that predate whales and fish and maybe even predate humanity. Things that don't follow the rules. That don't show up on sonar or fish finders or any other technology we use to pretend we understand the ocean. Over the next few months, I saw the shadows 3 more times. Always in deep water. Always moving too fast. Always invisible to my instruments. And I started noticing something else. The shadows appeared more frequently in certain areas. Specific channels where the water was deepest. Specific times when the tide was changing. Like they followed patterns. Like they had territories. Like they were hunting. Other captains started admitting they'd seen them too. Not in public. Not where anyone could overhear. But in quiet conversations at the dock or over the radio when we thought no one else was listening. We compared notes. Tried to figure out what we were dealing with. The descriptions were consistent. Massive shadows. Impossibly fast. Invisible to sonar. And always moving with purpose. Not drifting with currents. Not feeding randomly. Moving like they knew exactly where they were going. Like they were tracking something. In August, a fishing boat went down in Frederick Sound. The Molly Ann, 38-foot commercial vessel. Experienced crew, perfect weather. They were hauling in a salmon net when their radio went dead. Another boat found them 20 minutes later. The Molly Ann was gone. Just gone. All they found was debris. Pieces of hull. Chunks of equipment. And the net. The net was shredded. Not cut. Not torn by rocks or propellers. Shredded like something had bitten through it. Something with teeth the size of fence posts. The Coast Guard investigated, called it a catastrophic hull failure. Maybe they hit a submerged log. Maybe the engine exploded. Maybe a rogue wave caught them wrong. The official report listed it as an accidental sinking. But the other captains knew. We'd all seen the photos of the net, seen the bite marks, seen the way the steel cable had been snapped like thread. That wasn't the log. That wasn't an engine failure. That was something with a mouth. Something that had decided the Mollyand was food. After that, the shadows got bolder, started coming closer to the surface, started following boats for longer periods. I saw one in September that came within 20 feet of my hull, close enough that I could see details, see that it wasn't just a shadow. There was texture to it, ridges running along its length, protrusions that might have been fins or limbs or something else entirely. And at one end, where the head should be, there was a darkness that was darker than the rest. A void that seemed to absorb light. That made my eyes hurt to look at it directly. The thing circled my boat 3 times. Slow, deliberate, like it was studying us, like it was deciding whether we were worth eating. My passengers that day were a retired couple from Minnesota. They never saw it, never looked down, never noticed that their captain was gripping the wheel hard enough to leave marks in the plastic. Never realized how close they came to ending up like the crew of the Mollyand. When it finally dove and disappeared, I had to force myself to breathe normally. Had to unclench my jaw. Had to pretend everything was fine while my hands shook and my heart hammered against my ribs. That night, I seriously considered selling the boat, just walking away from 16 years of work, because the ocean had stopped feeling like home and started feeling like enemy territory. But I kept going, because this was my life, my income, my identity. I was a captain. The ocean was where I belonged. And I told myself the shadows were just an anomaly, just some species we hadn't documented yet. Probably some kind of giant squid or deep water shark that came to the surface occasionally. Nothing supernatural, nothing to be terrified of. Just nature being weird the way nature sometimes is. Then the dream started. I was underwater, always underwater, swimming in darkness so complete I couldn't see my own hands. But I could feel things around me, massive presences moving through the black, creating currents that pushed and pulled me. And I knew, with the absolute certainty that only exists in dreams, that they were aware of me. That they'd always been aware of me. Every time I'd gone out on the water, every trip I'd made, every time I thought I was safe in my little boat on the surface, they'd been down there, watching, waiting, deciding. I'd wake up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat, my chest tight like I'd actually been holding my breath underwater. And I hear something, a sound so low it was almost subsonic, a vibration that came from outside, from the harbor where my boat was docked, from the water, like something enormous was singing, like the ocean itself was breathing, like the depths were calling me home. Other captains reported the same dreams, the same sounds. We stopped talking about it after a while because what was there to say? That we were being haunted by shadows in the water? That the ocean was getting inside our heads? We sounded sane. And maybe we were going insane. Maybe spending too much time on the water had broken something in all of us. Maybe we created a collective delusion to explain things we didn't. We want to accept about risk and danger and the fundamental unknowability of the deep. But then Connor disappeared. He'd gone down to check on his personal boat one night in late October. Never came back. They found the boat the next morning, still tied to the dock. His wallet and keys on the seat. His jacket hung neatly on a hook. And wet footprints leading from the boat to the edge of the dock. Leading down into the water. Just like he walked right off the edge in the middle of the night and kept walking down into the harbor. Down into the depths where the shadows swam. The police called it suicide. Said he'd been depressed. Said the fishing industry was struggling and maybe he couldn't handle the financial pressure. They didn't know about the shadows. Didn't know about the dreams. Didn't know that Connor had told me just 3 days before he vanished that he was hearing the song all the time now. Even on land, even in his apartment miles from the water, that it was getting louder, that it was calling his name, that soon he'd have to answer. I should have gotten him help. Should have realized he was in crisis. Should have done something other than nod and agree that, yeah, the sounds were getting worse. That, yeah, maybe we were all losing it. But I didn't. Because I was hearing them too. Because admitting Connor needed help meant admitting I needed help. Meant admitting that something was fundamentally wrong with all of us who worked these waters. And I wasn't ready to accept that. Wasn't ready to give up my life. My boat, My identity as a captain who knew the sea. 2 weeks after Connor's death, I took what would be my last charter. A marine biologist from UC Berkeley who had come to Alaska to study humpback whale feeding behavior. She had sonar equipment, high-end stuff, military grade, could map the bottom with incredible detail, could track fish schools and marine mammals with precision I'd never seen before. She spent the first day calibrating it, getting readings, mapping the channels, and the whole time I watched the screens, watched for shadows that shouldn't be there, for contacts that moved too fast or disappeared too quickly. And I saw them, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, all through the deep channels, all moving in coordinated patterns, all invisible to her sonar. She'd point to a school of herring or a pod of orcas, excited by the clarity of the readings. And I see the shadows moving underneath them, circling, stalking, waiting, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. The shadows weren't random. They were everywhere, had always been everywhere. The inside passage was into whale habitat that occasionally attracted strange visitors. It was their territory, their hunting ground, and everything else, the whales and fish and boats. We were all just prey moving through their space, tolerated until we weren't, ignored until they got hungry. That night, anchored in a quiet cove, the biologist asked if I'd ever seen anything unusual in these waters. Anything that didn't fit, anything unexplained. And I almost told her, almost showed her the shadows on my sonar that weren't on hers. Almost explained about Connor and the dreams in the song that never stopped. But I didn't, because she'd think I was crazy, because I'd lose what little credibility I had left, because saying it out loud would make it too real, would force me to confront what I'd been avoiding, that I needed to get off the water, that I needed to walk away, that I was next. The shadows came that night, more than I'd ever seen. The water around the boat lit up with bioluminescence as they passed. Massive shapes creating swirls of light, moving in circles around us, getting closer with each pass. I could feel them, feel the displacement of water as they swam, feel the boat rock gently as they created currents. And I could hear the song, louder than it had ever been. So low it was more vibration than sound. It came up through the hull, through my feet, into my bones, into my skull, calling me, telling me to come down, to join them, to stop pretending I belonged on the surface when my real home was in the depths. In the dark, in the cold, where the shadows swam and waited and sang. I started the engine, pulled anchor, got us out of that cove at full throttle while the biologist yelled questions I couldn't to hear over the roar of my own fear. We made it back to Juneau by dawn. I dropped her at the dock, apologized for cutting the charter short, refunded her money, and that afternoon, I put the boat up for sale. The new owner took possession last week. Young guy, full of enthusiasm, full of plans. I wanted to warn him, wanted to tell him about the shadows, about the song, about Connor and the dreams and everything that swims in the deep places where light doesn't reach. But I didn't, because he wouldn't believe me, because he'd find out on his own eventually, because maybe I'm the problem, maybe I'm the one who is broken. Maybe the shadows are just shadows and the song is just the sound of my own mind falling apart. But I don't think so, because I still hear it, even here in my apartment in downtown Juneau, 2 miles from the harbor. Even with the windows closed and the TV turned up loud, I can still hear that subsonic vibration, that call from the depths. It is fainter now, quieter, but it is there, always there, reminding me that the ocean doesn't forget, that the shadows know who I am, that someday, maybe soon, I'll walk down to the water, this edge. I'll keep walking when my feet touch the waves. I'll keep walking as the water rises over my head. And I'll finally answer the call that has been pulling at me since the first time I saw those impossible shapes swimming in the dark. The inside passage is beautiful. That is what all the tourist brochures say, what all the travel blogs claim. And it is beautiful, stunning, one of the most incredible places on earth. But beauty is a mask. And under that mask, in the channels and straits and deep water trenches, something ancient swims. Something that was here before us and will be here after. Something that occasionally decides to remind us that the ocean isn't ours, has never been ours. That we, revisitors on the surface of a world that belongs to things we can't see, can understand, can only fear as they pass beneath us in the dark, patient and hungry and inevitable as the tide. Story 9. Lost minutes. I sat in a concert hall in Sitka, Alaska and forgot who I was for 13 minutes. And when my identity came back, I was standing on stage holding a violin I do not know how to play. My name is Robert Hayes. I am 46 years old, an accountant from Phoenix who was visiting Alaska on vacation in October 1985. I had never been to a classical music concert before that night. I am not a musician. I cannot read sheet music. I have never touched a violin in my life. But for 13 minutes, I became someone else, and that someone knew exactly what they were doing. The Sitka Symphony Hall is a beautiful building overlooking the harbor, all dark wood and elegant architecture. My wife had wanted to attend the performance, a special concert featuring local musicians and guest performers from Seattle. I agreed because it seemed like a nice thing to do on our anniversary trip. We had good seats, center section about 10 rows back, with a clear view of the stage. The concert started normally, the orchestra filed out, took their positions, and began playing. I am not knowledgeable about classical music, but it sounded professional to me. The audience was quiet and attentive, maybe 200 people filling the hall. My wife held my hand, smiling as the music washed over us. It should have been a pleasant evening, a memory we would look back on fondly. Then something changed in the music. I cannot describe it exactly. The melody shifted, or maybe it was the rhythm, or maybe it was something else entirely. Something underneath the notes that my ears could not quite process but my brain reacted to. The sound became heavier, more present, like it was pushing against me. The air in the hall felt thick, harder to breathe. I looked at my wife. She was still smiling, but her eyes had gone distant, unfocused, like she was looking at something far away that only she could see. I tried to speak to her, to ask if she was okay, but my mouth would not form words. My thoughts were becoming fuzzy, indistinct. I could feel my sense of self starting to slip away, like sand running through fingers. The last thing I remember clearly was a feeling of falling. Not physically, but mentally, like my consciousness was dropping through layers of reality, descending into something deep and dark and ancient. Then everything went blank. When I came back to myself, I was standing on the stage. The stage. I was holding a violin in my left hand and a bow in my right, and I was playing. My fingers were moving across the strings with practiced precision, creating notes that flowed perfectly with the rest of the orchestra. I could hear myself playing, could feel the muscle memory in my hands, could understand the sheet music on the stand in front of me even though I had never learned to read it. But it was not me. I was aware, conscious, watching myself play, but I had no control. Someone else was operating my body, someone who knew this instrument, who understood this music, who belonged on this stage. I was a passenger in my own skin. I looked around frantically, trying to make sense of what was happening. The other musicians were still playing, their faces calm and focused, like nothing was wrong. But scattered throughout the audience, I could see people wandering. They had left their seats and were moving aimlessly through the aisles, their expressions blank and confused. Some were touching the walls, running their hands over the wood paneling like they were trying to remember what walls were. Others were simply standing still, staring at nothing. My wife was one of them. She was in the aisle near our seats, turning slowly in circles, her mouth moving soundlessly. She looked lost, terrified, like a child separated from her parents in a crowded store. I tried to stop playing, tried to put down the violin and go to her, but my body would not respond. My hands kept moving, the bow sliding across the strings, producing music I should not be able to create. I was screaming inside my own head, but nothing came out. I was trapped. Then I felt it, the presence. Something vast and aware was in the hall with us, moving through the space like invisible smoke. It was observing, learning, taking pieces from each of us, sampling our identities like someone browsing books in a library. I could feel it touch my mind, feel it rifle through my memories and experiences, extracting information with clinical detachment. It was not hostile. That was somehow worse. It was curious. We were specimens, data points. It wanted to understand what we were, how we worked, what made us individuals. And the only way it could learn was by temporarily removing our sense of self, by shuffling our identities around like cards in a deck, by making us experience being someone else. The musician whose identity I was wearing, whose skills I was using, was somewhere in the audience. One of those wandering people with blank faces and lost expressions. We had been swapped. Our sense of self, our memories, our core identity had been extracted and placed in different bodies. Not all of us, just enough to create chaos, enough to generate data. I do not know how I knew this, The information simply appeared in my mind, clear and certain. The presence was letting me understand, perhaps as part of its experiment. Perhaps because it wanted to see how I would react to knowing what was happening. Time moved strangely. I have no idea how long I stood there playing that violin. It could have been minutes or hours, but gradually, I started to feel the presence withdrawing. The pressure in the air eased. The music began to sound normal again, losing that underlying quality that had triggered this whole event. And then, like a switch being flipped, I was back. My identity snapped into place with almost physical force, making me gasp. I was myself again, Robert Hayes, accountant, husband, tourist. The violin in my hands became alien and wrong. I did not know how to hold it, how to make it produce sound. I almost dropped it. Around me, the other musicians were looking confused, glancing at their instruments and each other with expressions of bewilderment. In the audience, the wandering people had stopped moving. They stood frozen for a moment, then awareness returned to their faces. My wife blinked, looked around at the aisle she was standing in, her face transforming from confusion to horror as she realized she was not in her seat. The conductor, who had been leading the orchestra through all of this without apparent concern, suddenly stopped. His baton lowered slowly, and he stared at it like he had never seen it before. The music trailed off into silence. The entire hall was quiet, everyone looking at each other, trying to process what had just happened. I looked at the clock on the wall. 13 minutes had passed since the moment I last remembered being in my seat. 13 minutes of missing time, of borrowed identity, of being something I was not. I carefully set the violin down on the nearest music stand and walked off the stage on trembling legs. My wife met me at the edge of the audience section. We held each other, both of us shaking, both of us unable to speak. Around us, other people were doing the same, hugging loved ones, touching their own faces like they needed to confirm they were back in the right body, whispering questions that nobody could answer. The official response was swift and thorough. Within an hour, officials arrived, not just local police, but people in suits who carried themselves with federal authority. They separated us, questioned us individually, took statements. They were particularly interested in what we remembered, what we had experienced during those 13 minutes. I told them everything. About playing the violin, about the presence in the hall, about the feeling of having my identity removed and replaced. The agent taking my statement showed no surprise. He wrote it all down methodically, like I was describing a car accident, not an impossible violation of everything we understand about consciousness and reality. The official explanation came the next day. Mass hysteria triggered by infrasound from the heating system. The particular frequency had caused a temporary dissociative episode in audience members, creating false memories and confused perceptions. Everyone would be fine. There was no danger. The symphony hall would be inspected and the heating system repaired before any future performances. It was a lie, a carefully constructed story designed to explain away something that had no rational explanation. But people wanted to believe it, needed to believe it. The alternative was too terrifying. That something unknown could reach into a crowded room and simply take away who we were, shuffle our identities like puzzle pieces, observe us like laboratory animals. My wife and I left Alaska the next day. We never talked about what happened. Not to each other, not to anyone else. We had signed papers, been warned that discussing the incident could result in legal consequences. But more than that, we were afraid. Afraid that talking about it might somehow attract that presence again, make it aware of us, bring it back. Our marriage did not survive. She looked at me differently after that night. I think she remembered seeing me on stage, playing that violin with someone else's hands. And she could not reconcile it with the man she knew. We divorced within a year. She moved to Maine, changed her name, disappeared from my life completely. I went back to Phoenix, back to my job, back to my normal life. But nothing was normal anymore, because sometimes, usually late at night when I am alone, I feel my sense of self start to slip. My memories become fuzzy, my identity feels less certain, and I wonder if that presence is back, if it is still studying me, still experimenting with who I am. Last month, I woke up in my kitchen holding a knife I do not remember taking from the drawer. I had made a sandwich with precise, practiced movements that I do not consciously know how to perform. The sandwich was perfectly constructed, professional quality, like something from an expensive deli. But I do not have those skills. I am not a chef. Someone else had been in control of my body. Someone who knew exactly how to hold a knife and prepare food. It lasted maybe 30 seconds before I was back, but it was long enough to terrify me. Long enough to confirm what I had suspected for 39 years. The presence did not just visit us that night in Sitka. It marked us, claimed us, and now, whenever it wants, it can reach across whatever distance separates our reality from wherever it exists and simply take control. I have tried to find the other people who were at that concert. Most of them are dead. Suicides, accidents, medical conditions that do not quite make sense. The ones who are still alive refuse to talk to me. They change their phone numbers, move without leaving forwarding addresses, disappear like my ex-wife did. They are running from the same thing I am. But you cannot run from something that exists inside your own mind. Something that can override your identity with a thought. Something that views consciousness itself as a resource to be borrowed and studied and returned when it is done. I am writing this because I need someone to know. Because if I disappear, if I wake up one day and never come back to myself, someone should understand what happened. That I did not choose to leave. That I was taken. That somewhere, in some space we cannot see or measure, something vast and curious is conducting experiments on human consciousness. And we are all potential subjects, waiting for the moment when the music changes and our sense of self slips away into the dark. The last whisper fades, but the cold lingers. If you felt the dark tonight, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next story waits just beyond the ice. Tell us where you're listening from or share your own strange encounter. Your words feed the fire here at Midnight Whispers. Alaska's night is long, and our stories are longer. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your footsteps soft.